So again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the SAP community call on the topic altruistic algorithms, bringing the power of data science to the charity sector. So my name is Svea Becker. I'm from the SAP community team, and I'm here today with Sukhil Patel. This is our speaker for today. He's a data scientist at the company Kaluza, which is a company for renewable energy. Sukhil is a data ambassador volunteer for DataKind and has been a data scientist not only in the renewable energy industry, but also in the automotive industry. So welcome, Sukhil, and thanks very much for joining and taking part of the SAP community calls.
Cheers, thank you, Svea. Thank you for having me. I will begin now my presentation on demystifying data. Is using analytics to drive social impact. And as Svea said, I'm a data scientist and I'm also a volunteer for DataKind UK. So DataKind is an organization vastly made up of volunteers. So as you can see, some smiling volunteers here. I think this was taken at a event last year. There are only in the UK 2 or 3 permanent employees, and the rest are made up of volunteers. So it is an organization that runs very much on people's altruism. So the first thing I wanted to get into was the sort of themes of data maturity. So these are things that not only a charity should think about, but corporations too. So the things that you need in an organization to make sure that you have a good sort of data process is leadership. You need leadership that's going to invest in data, invest in the right infrastructures. You need the people with the skills. You need the culture. You need, obviously, the data. You actually need to be collecting that. Having specific tools to keep data and analyze data. Have use cases, and then the analytics skill set as well. So more about DataKind. DataKind are an organization or a charity that helps other charities use and harness the power of data science. So they do that by 3 different main types of events. A data therapy course, which is basically if a charity is interested in what could they be doing with their data, what hidden trends or patterns or predictive capabilities are in their data that they don't know about, they can just go along to a data therapy session, and there'll be 1 or 2 volunteers from DataKind along there. This isn't a big commitment. This is literally just coming with some data that's been anonymized, so there's no personal information being put out there, and asking what can we do with this. DataDives are sort of the flagship event of DataKind. They're a weekend hackathon style event that basically get a bunch of data science volunteers, so coming from a data background, so data analysts, data scientists, and so forth, to work on defined problems that a data ambassador would have worked on for 6 to 8 weeks beforehand to get their charity in place, so where volunteers can come in and actually get some good results out of a weekend and then report back at the end of the weekend. And then if those go well, the data cores are your long-term projects, your 6 months to 1 year projects, where if something substantial was seen in a data dive or there was an interesting idea that could be turned into a real process or application, that's when it would be done there. So the first thing, obviously, it's very relevant now with GDPR and with all the privacy protection, is how DataKind handles the data. So there's strict guidelines and protocols. Obviously, a lot of these charities have quite sensitive information and data that they're handing over, and they see. So everyone who participates in a data dive weekend has to sign an NDA. Also, every volunteer is asked to have their hard drive encrypted to make sure no one can get into it, and everything is deleted after it's seen on a weekend. So how can we use data? So now we're going to talk through some examples of work DataKind has done previously. So the first one is Centrepoint UK, who are a charity, a charity for homelessness, and this is youth homelessness in particular. So the question here is, how many young people are at risk of homelessness? So on the left is the data that was received, I believe, from the Freedom of Information Act, asking about different districts what their youth homelessness rates were. So you can see on the left here, it's quite spotty. You haven't got London filled in very well. And these are only so councils and communities who would have given that official figure. You can see it's well populated in Scotland, but very patchy in England. So this led to a sort of estimated amount of youth homelessness, or people, or youngsters at risk of youth homelessness, around 15 to 20,000, official UK figure. However, using the statistics that were given by all of the councils that actually gave data, you could use different demographics and different socioeconomic factors in each council area to actually predict, for areas that you didn't get data, what their youth homelessness rate could be. So on the right, you can see for England, this was what some DataKind UK volunteers did, was fill in all the gaps and basically get a full estimation of youth homelessness in the UK. And based on their predictions, they had 136,000 youngsters who might be at risk of homelessness, which is 8 times the official government figure, which was really interesting work they did with Centrepoint. And Centrepoint, I think, was really happy with that. Next, so there's always a big question in organizations like Oxfam, that if you gave people monetary help, if you gave cash donations to someone, would they spend that on the things that are essential rather than spending on something frivolous? There's always some sort of feeling that if you gave someone money, they might not spend it on food, or they might go spend it on something else. So this was a study that DataKind did, looking at Ethiopia and Yemen and cash injections, and whether the food consumption score went up. So basically, are they using the money for food? In both cases, it was yes. You can see these box plots. The mean amount has risen quite drastically between the two, which was really interesting analysis going forward. And Oxfam could see that actually cash was working in this case. Here we have Global Witness. This was an organization trying to clamp down on sort of fraud and anomalies in corporate systems. So this was, can we shed light on anonymous or shell companies? So basically companies that are set up as an organization but don't actually do anything, but maybe being used for nefarious reasons. And they found, so this is a great plot here, you probably can't see the detail in it, but it's basically linking one company to many others, or one postcode to many others. And they found that one London postcode is home to over 30,000 registered companies, which is really interesting. Because you wouldn't expect, I think this was even a residential postcode, you wouldn't expect one house to be the center for all these organizations. You know, you can imagine if there were 30,000 companies trying to operate from one house. I think from this analysis, they found that there were some companies that apparently had CEOs who hadn't been born yet, which was quite interesting. So yeah, at the heart of everything is DataKind loving data. And now I'm going to get into, I guess, more of the sort of theory about some of what we do, again, some more examples. And the first thing I want to bring up is this picture, which is basically, for anyone who is quite confused about what machine learning actually means, you can basically get it down to, it is statistics, but being used on usually a lot of data. As you can see, the humble linear regression here. It used to be called statistics in 2009. In 2019, it is now called machine learning. I guess the one differentiator there is the amount of data that's used on. So some charity stats. So obviously DataKind work with charities. Nearly 30% of charities now use cloud-based IT systems. This is a 15-fold increase from 2014, which I think is really interesting, which shows the, I guess, scale of data that's being kept now, even in 5 years, has increased vastly, and the demand to keep that data. 64% of charities identified problem solving as a lacking skill within an organization. And this is in the context of a charity digital index survey. So they are looking for people who can identify problems and trends in their data and actually try and solve them. So the last DataDive in November, so there was one actually last weekend, but this was the one previous to that. there were over 130 volunteers, so a real mix of from different professions, different backgrounds. There were 4 charities, as you can see along the bottom here. Fair Share, who use basically trying to stop food waste and redistribute food to other charities. Ad Action, which are a prominent addiction charity. Lancashire Women's Centre, which is used for empowerment of women in the Lancashire region, and Anthony Nolan, which is for stem cell donation and for bone marrow donation. So a real mix of charities were there, and there were 2 days of incredible data science work from everyone there, and some really interesting feedback and some really interesting results. So one of the things is that like everyone talks about, I guess, the data reality. At the top of this iceberg, you can see that 20% of your time is probably going to spend on the actual algorithms and the data analysis part, but the majority of time is the data wrangling, which is basically acquiring the data from somewhere. So this might be some database, this might be some API that you can query. The data cleaning, getting your data in order, and the data engineering. So actually building maybe some automated pipeline to get you the data, the fresh data, daily or hourly, or whatever timestamp you need. So this is the sort of work that goes on, and really that these DataDive events, it's the 20% that's being worked on. The 80% is worked on by ambassadors beforehand. And something else I wanted to talk about is sort of in data science, we obviously focus a lot on the data part, but the science part is really important, and that's something that's utilized by DataKind a lot. This is a gift from the film The Martian, my favorite quote from the film. You have to use science, and the scientific process is asking a question, stating a hypothesis about the answer to the question, make a testable prediction that would provide evidence in favor of the hypothesis, if correct, and then testing that prediction via an experiment involving some real data. And then obviously draw the conclusions once you have your results. Was your initial hypothesis correct? If it was, are you sure it's significant? Are you sure that the procedure used is correct? If it wasn't correct, also questioning that. And the data journey really starts with all these questions, then doing some initial exploratory analysis, and then getting to your final results. So one of the outputs was for the Lancashire Women's Centre, and this was a quite telling output. This is a part of survival analysis, and this is called a Kaplan-Meier plot. So basically, it shows the risk of, in this case, the context is for the Lancashire Women's Centre, some women who are referred to them have committed some offence, and they are put into their system. And there is obviously risk of reoffence during their time with Lancashire Women's Centre. And this plot basically shows at each time step, so each time step here being a day, what the risk of here being no reoffence, so it's 1 minus whatever that is the risk of offence. So the risk of offence here is greater for, you see this purple line, is basically domestic abuse was seen to be a big factor in play. And if not only was it if you were personally had experience with domestic abuse, but even if you had witnessed domestic abuse as a child. So this was survey results that were taken by Lancashire Women's Centre when a woman first enters their process. And you can see that a woman who had witnessed domestic abuse and experienced domestic abuse basically had this steepest curve, and this steepest curve meant that they had the most likely quickest time to reoffend and were most likely to reoffend at the same time, which was quite telling for those who are maybe most vulnerable in our society, needed the most help. And Lancashire Women's Centre were actually going to use some of this analysis to change some of their systems and protocols so that they could maybe give more support to these women. So we had other key findings from this. So this was the starting score for women who came into the process about how they felt they were dealing with different aspects of their lives. And you can see the 0 to 5 being the lowest score range, the highest proportion of 0 to 5 scores came from things like mental health and well-being and managing strong feelings, which was really telling again, because these are some of the hardest things to, I guess, control in your life. So a crime-free life being very, very low compared to all the other results here. You also saw what was the different types of therapies, different types of, I guess, treatments available for each one, and what was their success rates on a sort of self-assessment basis. So you can see that the brief psychodynamic psychotherapy had a 100% success rate, but luckily with this data analysis, someone has enabled the frequency on the top of the bar charts here. So you only have one person who went through this type of therapy. So you can't really call that a statistically significant result yet. You need more data. But when you see something quite tried and tested, like counseling, number 48 here in the green bar, middle green bar, you can see that the success rate is around 30%, but you did have 3,839 individuals going through that. So you can probably rely on those statistics a bit more. But this was quite telling as well, because it showed Lancashire Women's Centre maybe what was working and what wasn't working, and where they could improve. So some other, from that weekend, we had some other charities, like I mentioned. So FareShare did this analysis. So this is a sort of clustering analysis of different groups of charities that needed similar requirements in terms of food. So can we identify common charity types, and do similar charities have similar food requirements? And they made these 11 groups here on the right. So breakfast clubs, addiction support and advice, community for sport, emergency food, and so on. This really helps because the logistics wise of getting food out to different regions, if you know there are going to be a bunch of charities who are going to need similar types of food, you can sell that all in one shipment. And this really saves a lot of time and is useful, keeping costs down for FareShare so they can continue doing their work. So if you've been interested in the types of work that you've seen here, or if you've been interested to try and help a charity, because charities really do need help in the terms of their resources aren't as great and as large as obviously as these major corporations, your Facebooks, your Googles, who have huge departments devoted to data and research. Charities usually don't even have one person who's maybe a data analyst or someone who's savvy with some statistics and whatnot. So if you would like to get involved, please head to datakind.org/get involved. It's quite easy to get involved. There is a few questions that will ask you about your experience with charities, your experience with data. Even if you're someone who has experience maybe from a non-technical side, you can get involved as a project manager and organizer. I think a lot of people have an imposter syndrome where they feel like they're not a true sort of data person compared to another person, but I think, to be honest, everyone has that. It's such a vast field and there's so many aspects to it that you're not going to know everything. But if you know enough that you think you can help, then please do get involved. And if you know a charity that wants to do more with their data, if you're involved in any charities, small or large, that think that, okay, we're actually not doing that much at the moment to harness this sort of new trend, then again, do reach out to DataKind. Go onto their website, datakind.org, and then you can basically write to them. A charity can write to them on their website for contact, and you can have one of those first data therapy sessions. Thank you very much for listening. If anyone has any questions, then I'm happy to take them. And yes, thank you again.
Yes, thank you, Sukil. Thanks very much. I think this is very impressive when you talk about 130 volunteers for this project. So, I mean, even in the small little environment I'm living in with my children and so on, and you have any event at school and you have to volunteer to sell some, I don't know, drinks or something, this is really hard to find the people. And when you're talking about 130 volunteers because it's of data, wow, this is really impressive to me.
Yeah, I think the amount of people as well means you can do some really impressive things. If you have 130 people using their brain power over 2 days to try and come up with solutions and new ideas, you really do get a lot done.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite impressive.
Definitely, it really makes a change. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So when there are any questions, you have the possibility to use on the black menu at the bottom the raise hand option, and then you can unmute yourself. And you can also post your questions here in the chat on the right-hand side, if you have any. And yeah, well, I think volunteer work is today very, very important, and it brings you together with all the different people. So this is a really good idea. And if you would like to join those kind of works, so as Sukhil just mentioned, just contact them. So maybe you, Sukhil, you can post the email address again here in the chat to all the attendees.
Sure. Yeah.
And of course, for everyone who could not join today's call, we will offer you the recording afterwards, and the recording will be fine. I will put as well in the chat. So here you can find the recording, and this is the link from Sukhil here where you can get involved if you are interested in. Wonderful. So if there are any more questions, then I close it up. Thanks very much for taking part of in the SAP community. It was a really interesting story you told me, or us. And yeah, I hope we will catch up sometime. Thanks very much, Sukhil.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.